Hello, can you hear me? Super. Hi. I just want to take a moment to say how nice it is to be back at RubyConf. We had a couple of pretty trippy years in the middle, and this is proof that we are back to normal. So it's really, really nice to be here. Thank you, RubyConfTH, for inviting me. My talk is called the Ecstatic Organization, and it's a discourse on organization design. And you will know soon why I call it a discourse and not a talk. But before that, a little bit about me. Sorry, I need to get my setup correct. So a little bit about me. I'm Siddharth. You can call me Sid or SVS. I started off as a Rubyist back in 2008 as well. But I soon got kicked upstairs to management, and I've been an engineering manager of some shade or stripe for the last 5-7 years. And I'm currently on sabbatical, so that's nice as well. You can ask me anything about sabbaticals later. But before this, I was CTO at InVideo, I was CTO at Shadi.com, I was a founder of a company. And I've had the opportunity to study engineering management quite closely. I now write a newsletter at engineeringorg.com, so please subscribe. And I'm on Twitter as SVS. Did I mention I write a newsletter? It's brand new and completely uncensored. Once it gets big, I'll start censoring myself, so you can get in right now for all the juicy takes, all the hot takes on engineering management. So as an engineering manager, CTO, engineering leader, I've often had to ask the question, what should work feel like? So I'd like to ask the audience, what should work feel like? It should feel amazing, right? And anyone else? Anyone have a dissenting opinion on this? Should feel like play. And yet, very often it doesn't. Am I right? I can't hear you. Oh, I know we are Rubyists, and we are basically tripping out at work the whole time. But even the Rubyists have the days when work does feel like work. And over time, I've developed this sort of preference that work should actually feel ecstatic. And there is a method to arrive at organizations where work feels ecstatic. But before we go any further, we need a working definition of ecstasy, right? And has anyone here had an ecstatic experience ever? Can we have some mics at the back or for the raised hands? Sorry, Mike. Audience participation. Or if you in the front want to share your ecstatic experience.
So, wow, this is loud. So after I joined my former team, we had to do some code digging, and it was really exciting because no one on the team knew what we were doing. And well, that thing was earning money for the company, like half a year. It was unmaintained. No one really took care of it. And a whole new bunch of people was thrown at the problem. And it was really fun working together with other disciplines, with product people, mathematicians, data scientists, to look into the code and understand how it really worked. And it took us 3 months, the better part of it. And for the first couple of weeks, we were really super early at work and worked super long nights, and it was fun. Nothing to sustain, but you really could feel at that point in time that the team was energetic and ecstatic for the topic that we were to work on. So.
Thanks. Anyone else?
I'll give you two.
This time not a coding one, please.
Just one.
Yeah.
All right.
Not a coding one.
Not a coding one. That's fine. Yeah. For me, it's when you see people that you work with achieving a new level, like stepping up in a way that you've never seen them do it before, and you've known, reaching their potential.
Okay. Anyone else?
For me, I've got 4 kids. Actually seeing the eldest two now, so they're 16, 18, and actually taking one, their music, the other one, his dance, just to a level that I could never imagine for myself. So just actually enabling them to be a better human than you is just ecstasy. Like that is really cool.
Such a cool story. And maybe someone raised their hand from the back. We'll take one more shot at ecstatic experience, and maybe something from your personal life, not professional, because we'll get to that in my talk. And no one?
Yeah, I'm part of another ecstatic community, Ecstatic Dance. So
awesome.
This is what we're like going for all the time. And
Fantastic.
for me, about 45 minutes of some deep house will probably do it most times.
Slick. That's amazing. So kind of, we don't have a definition yet, but we kind of have an idea of what ecstasy feels like, right? Generally, and the ecstatic dancers and the parents here will know that when you dance like that, or when you hold your kid in your arms, or climb a high mountain, or win at sports, or achieve something professionally, a few things happen, right? Like time and space seem to disappear, right? Hunger and thirst are no longer things. In fact, you kind of forget that you are even there, right? Usually there's a lot of emotion involved, and the experience kind of takes over the entirety of your consciousness, almost, so to speak. Does that about feel okay as a sort of description of ecstasy? And if you look at the dictionary definition, it says many of the same things: an overwhelming feeling of great happiness or joyful excitement, an emotional or religious frenzy or trance-like state, originally one involving an experience of mystic self-transcendence. And then, of course, there's the recreational drug. But this is interesting. Late Middle English, via Latin from Greek, ecstasis, which is standing outside oneself. And this seems to be a defining characteristic of ecstasy, is that your idea of who you are kind of fades away in the background, and that is what enables that total joy, which takes over your entire consciousness. And I want to thank the people who shared their ecstatic experiences here, but I know for a fact that almost everyone in this room, for certain, has had an ecstatic experience, and we all share that ecstatic experience in common. And it is the reason why we trekked all the way to Bangkok, or paid money to be at this conference, or spent time preparing a talk. It's because we want to relive that joy that we felt while programming computers in general, and programming Ruby in particular. And you remember this, that you used to spend hours just lost in the beauty of this language that Matt has invented, solving problem after problem, losing all track of time. You work so much, your family starts to worry that you're going to collapse, but somehow the energy never seems to stop, and you walk around with this glazed eyes and a gentle smile playing upon your face. Sounds familiar? Anyone else been here? Or was it just me? All right. So my question is, and for those of you who are lucky enough to not relate with the next slide, congratulations, but over my time I have seen that that's not what work looks like anymore, right? Where did that joyful expression of our creativity, where did it go? How did it become this? Standing around with the same 4, 6, 8, 10 people every morning asking, what are you working on? Are you blocked on anything? Not even really paying attention when someone else is speaking. We all do Scrum, but yeah, one sprint starts, the another one begins, and one sprint starts, and another one begins. It's like a Sisyphean ordeal almost of programming, where you're never ever going to get to the end of this stream. And programming used to be simple, but now suddenly we have all of these terms, Scrum Master, sprint review, burn down charts, retrospectives, etc., etc., etc. And this experience, I'm sure you will all agree, is far from ecstatic. And perhaps this is just what adulting is. You know, you might say, Sid, come on, man. Like when we were programming computers by ourselves, it was different. But when you have stakeholders and investors and so on and so forth, like this is serious business. This cannot be fun. And so I ask, is this what that parable of Adam and Eve talks about? That one day you are banished from this bucolic paradise where you used to frolic, you ate from the fruit of knowledge, and now you are banished from this garden, and you can never ever get back to that state of innocence and grace that you were in, right? Maybe this is just adulting. So I have this question, like I don't accept this. I don't accept that suffering should be a part of a professional life. And I find quite similar question was asked by another person about 2.5 millennia ago, right? He also has the same name as me, by the way. And this person asked a very, very radical question. He saw, I'm assuming this requires no explanation. Okay. He saw a few people. He was a prince born into the lap of luxury. And he saw, according to the fables, these 4 sights of an old man, a sick man, what was the third one? A cripple and a holy man. And he saw these various stages of suffering, and he asked a very simple and very radical question. Why does suffering exist? Is suffering necessary? Is there a way out of it? And my talk is essentially taking the lessons from him, his journey, and the journey of several others like him, which is essentially the large school of Indian or Eastern or Oriental metaphysics, because these are people who studied this problem with a very clear eye, right? And they were not irrational. They were actually extremely scientific and rational in their approach of this problem, or rather scientific. The problem itself is not amenable to rational analysis, but they went a very long way. And the Buddha, one day, sitting under the Bodhi tree, he found the answer to his question. And he attained nirvana. He came face to face with ultimate reality. And the way he described it was that his suffering ceased, right? He was very, like, I guess, didn't want to like overstate the case. And he said, all that happened is my suffering ceased. Other schools of Indian thought describe it slightly differently. The word they use is bliss, right? But neither cessation of suffering, nor joy, nor bliss actually sums up, for me, the kind of organization that I want to build, right? Both of these schools of thought teach you that your senses and your mind lie to you, and to pierce through this veil of illusion and ignorance, you actually need to withdraw from the senses. But there is one school of Eastern thought which goes the other way and says, these senses are given to you to experience this moment. God exists in this moment, and it is through your senses that you will achieve knowledge of ultimate reality. And that school of thought is called Tantra, and their language that they use about it is much more to my taste. I just want to say you can choose any one of these approaches depending on what suits you best. But they say here that Tantra smashes the taboo against unreasonable happiness. Wow. That sounds like a life worth living, where you're unreasonably happy. A thunderbolt path, swift, joyful, and fierce. And there is no authentic Tantra without profound commitment, discipline, courage, coupled with a sense of wild, foolhardy, fearless abandon. Total faith in the forces of the universe to sustain you. And here I'm going to take a small pause, an emo break. I'm going to let one very wise man talk a little bit more about Tantra, because I just thought this poem is super beautiful and I wanted to share.
Beautiful poem, which is the essence of the tantric path. It's exactly what you describe. A beautiful translation by Stephen Mitchell. Plump apple, smooth banana, melon, peach, gooseberry. How all this affluence speaks life and death into the mouth. I sense. Observe it from a child's transparent features while he tastes. What miracle is happening in your mouth? Instead of words, discoveries flow out from the ripe fruit, astonished to be free. Dare to say what apple truly is, this sweetness at first thick, dark, dense, then exquisitely lifted in your taste, grows clarified, awake, luminous. Oh, double meaninged, sunny, earthy, real, knowledge, pleasure, inexhaustible. Well, all praise goes to Rilke and Stephen Mitchell's exquisite translation. That is the essence of Tantra, that poem. Unlike the Vedantic path, which ignores objective experience and asks the question, who am I, or what is it that knows or is aware of my experience, or any such question. And this takes us away from the objective content of experience directly to ourself. In this path, we go the other direction. Plump apple, smooth banana, melon, peach, gooseberry. This is going deeply into the senses, into experience, into sensations, into sights, into sounds, going deeper and deeper and deeper. Dare to say what apple truly is, that this concept that has imprisoned our experience. And in this beautiful line, instead of words, discoveries flow out from the ripe fruit, astonished to be free. And then he reduces and reduces and reduces, goes to the heart, looking for the signature of consciousness in every experience. In this beautiful last line, oh, knowledge, pleasure, inexhaustible. That is infinite consciousness. Knowledge, inexhaustible knowledge, unlimited knowledge, which in the tantric tradition, the pleasure of the senses are a gateway into infinite consciousness or inexhaustible knowledge.
All of that from eating an apple, right? So, in my opinion, once I saw this, I figured these people have something to teach us for sure. What happened here? Okay. And we talk about spirituality, and often God is conflated with spirituality. But spirituality is not about God. It is about truth. It is about ultimate truth, or reaching universal consciousness. And it is about the ending of suffering and the path to ecstasy. So what do we have to learn from these people? We'll get to that. At this point, you might be asking, this sounds like a lot of trouble. Say, like, why do we need to do this? And in fact, many people, even before the Buddha, even today, up to this point, they have no idea that they're suffering. Those that suffer don't see a way out. Some of them suffer and see a way out through sense pleasure and material comfort. Very, very few stop to ask the question, is there a kind of lasting release from this cycle of suffering? And to that, I will ask, ecstasy is as necessary as suffering is unnecessary, right? And as the great man said, pain in life is inevitable, but suffering is not. So perhaps not everyone sets this goal that I want my professional life to be ecstatic, but if you do, there are people who have done this in a much more general context, and they do have something to say to us about this. Secondly, I'll say that suffering is dangerous. Capitalism is the dominant political economy of the planet. It is embodied in organizations, and when organizations suffer dysfunction, they cause others to suffer in turn. And as we've seen, the various challenges that our planet faces, if we want to fix them, we are going to have to build more evolved consciousness inside the organizations that we have. So if you need a reason, this can be one of them. But I would say, actually, don't worry so much about the planet. You worry about yourself and what it is that you desire from your professional journey and take steps accordingly. So what do we know so far? We've kind of understood that suffering is optional. There are various paths. You can choose one or the other. And now we come to the trippy bit. How many of you here have some familiarity with Eastern metaphysics? No? Yes? Okay. Any Indians here? Okay. Shame on you. Okay. Eastern metaphysics is kind of, it's pretty trippy, okay? We're going to talk about the embodied consciousness, what you experience as yourself, and later we will talk about organizational consciousness, which is analogous to embodied consciousness. This right-hand side bit doesn't come from Eastern metaphysics, I made that up, but hopefully it makes sense, right? So here's the trippy bit. You are not a body with a brain and eyes and consciousness. You are a collection of energy fields. The ecstatic dancers amongst us might know that these are called chakras, or rather where they converge are called chakras. And that's basically you. This collection of energy fields comes from the universal source of energy, and it embodies itself by hallucinating a body and a world around itself. It also hallucinates itself, objectifies itself within this space in what is called ego, what Western psychology calls ego. The ego suffers, the ego is sitting there on top of this energy fields thinking it is doing things, thinking it's responsible for all that is happening and spinning elaborate stories about how it is good or bad. And by telling these stories, it suffers and it generates this thing called karma, which is a very, very big topic, but you can ask me more about it later. And it passes on this perpetual, because of its unconsciousness, it passes on this karma continuously, and the cycle of suffering continues. And in order to break out of this, there are several paths. There is the Buddhist path, there is the Vedantic path, there is the Tantric path, there are all of these, right? And this self-awareness leads to a dissolution of the ego and resultant ecstasy. Now, why? Why does this happen? Because you, as your ego, are about 4 layers removed from universal consciousness. And in Eastern metaphysics, you don't think thoughts. Okay, thoughts think you, like in Soviet Russia. And one day someone asked the Buddha, where do thoughts come from? And he says, if there were an arrow pierced in your heart, would you be asking, where has this arrow come from? Or would you be trying to get it out of there? So clearly thinking, which is of such a high regard in the Western post-Renaissance rationalist worldview, doesn't have the same pride of place in Eastern metaphysics. The way we explain it is that every thought that has already been thunk in this massive universe, right? And the reason it appears in your conscious mind is because it has attached to something in you. And there are like 4 layers. There is your, so there's universal consciousness, and then there is your embodied consciousness, which is called chitta, here. And then you have your intelligence, which is called buddhi, and then you come to your ahankar, means I-ness, or ego, and manas is mind, right? And so these thoughts that are floating around in universal consciousness attach to something in your chitta. If they attach to something in your chitta, they can rise up to your buddhi. If they attach to something there, they can rise up in your ego, and then they can rise up in your mind and arise as conscious thoughts in your consciousness, right? Pretty trippy, right? It's a little bit different than what we're used to. And running all of these layers and layers and layers takes a lot of energy. And it is this energy that could have been used to make you feel amazing. And also it like filters. You don't have access to everything anymore. You only have access to the things that are attaching themselves to you. So in order to reach source, you have to turn off all of these processes so that you get the unfiltered view of reality. And you have access to all knowledge and all, this is what they call ultimate reality or supreme truth, which is the kind of deity figure in Eastern metaphysics. So what they're trying to say is, you are already ecstatic. You have just forgotten. You have pulled over your eyes the veils of avidya, ignorance, and maya, illusion, and you have forgotten that you're actually an ecstatic being already. And the way to get back to being ecstatic is not to do anything extra, but is to do less. Okay? And this is, we'll talk a little bit more about this. I don't want to spend too much time on this slide. But both the Buddhist and Vedantic traditions have an eightfold path, many commonalities between the two, right thought, right action, right mindset, right mindfulness, so on and so forth. So far we know how consciousness creates the world and ourselves, and now we are ready to talk about actual organization design. So that was a crash course. Congratulations, you've learned more in the last 15 minutes about Eastern metaphysics than most people have. So just like a human embodies a consciousness, an organization also embodies a consciousness. We can think of an organization as a collection of energy fields, which is the energy that the various people that are in that organization bring to the task at hand and the organization. Also, the organization lives within other energy fields like a legal system, a financial system, a cultural system, and so on. The organization together hallucinates its own personality, culture, DNA. We can say hallucinates because there is no object there that you can point to and say this is the organization's culture or DNA. The organization is known, can be perceived through its effect on the world around it. And the organizational consciousness also suffers trauma and passes it on. And we want to find the analog to this eightfold path or yoga for how to run an organization so that it becomes self-aware and ecstatic in its sense, right? But the first ingredient of all of this, as we've seen in the first ingredient of all the people who walk this path, is a kind of higher purpose, a kind of higher purpose, and a sort of sense of that what we are doing here is one part of a great cosmic mystery that we are slowly trying to uncover at our own pace. And pretty much everyone who peeks into the infinite sciences or infinite mathematics or infinite anything comes back with a sense that there is a great mystery at play over here, and that there is something that we need to do, that what we do here is, and they'll use words like sacred and divine and so on and so forth, and the word God and so on. The number of quotes from scientists, mathematicians, musicians, so on and so forth are, there are more of them than you can shake a stick at. And luckily for us, we are computer programmers, and computer programming is a branch of mathematics, maybe, and mathematics is the language that God writes the world in. So we need to kind of stop thinking of our job as developing features or exchanging lines of code for money, and rather think of it more as one more step in this great mystery of how do we organize bits in a computer to bring order against this chaos that the universe is constantly trying to fall into. This is a kind of mindset that I have often kind of tried to introduce at my work, is that what we're doing is actually quite special, right? And in professional context, you might have to judge how much you want to use words like sacred and divine, but I like to think of computer programming as something really that gives me access into the mind of God. Meditation is a very, very big part of this eightfold path. What meditation does is it allows you to become aware of the fact that you are running this process called an ego, and this awareness is essentially the thing that allows it to dissolve. But what does it mean for an organization to meditate? I don't mean we should have meditation rooms and guided meditations and so on and so forth. No, we're not talking about the people in the organization meditating. We're talking about the organization itself consciously working on assessing its own thoughts, right? A couple of things that we can do. We're now in the practical part of the talk, how we can actually build organizations that are ecstatic. One of the things that we can do is enable flow states. I'm not sure how common this is. In India, it's very common that almost nobody gets a full uninterrupted day to work on their task at hand, right? And this is something that I've worked at the places I've worked in. Essentially clean up people's calendars, give them focus time, allow them to themselves meditate on the task at hand, do it with deep focus and clarity. You also have to architect the organization for autonomy. If teams need to keep bothering each other in order to get their work done, then you're going to have people that are constantly being interrupted by requests from other people. So there is no perfect org structure, but from time to time, you can achieve a sort of ideal state where teams are fully autonomous and can deliver the value that they're expected to without bothering anyone else. So that within that team, at least, they can develop one mind and don't suffer or need to disturb anyone else. Another thing you can do is reduce parallelism, because if you're working on too many things at a single time, you're probably not going to be able to focus very deeply. After all, we do not get paid for anything else except the quality of our decisions. And our decisions will get better the more focused we are on one task instead of spreading our awareness across 10 different tasks. We also have to take into account Conway's law, that you cannot actually, Conway's law states that a system that creates software, or an organization that creates software is constrained to create systems that mirror the organization of that mirror the structure of the organization. But the corollary is also true. If you want to change the structure of the organization, you also need to change the architecture of the underlying software to enable that. So this is one thing that we need to keep in mind, that there are system architectures that allow for greater autonomy, that allow for greater focus and greater flow, and there are those that militate against it. And we are going to need to be sensitive to what it is that our system architectures are allowing us to do in terms of our org design. One of the ingredients of flow is also fast feedback loops. We know this, those of us who do TDD know that when the test takes too long, it breaks the flow state of programming. And being in that flow state is something that often leads to a feeling of a job well done at the end of the day, ecstasy, to use that word once again. And the other thing that you want to do is make sure that everyone on the team understands the business impact of the work that they're doing through dashboards, so that feedback loops don't need to be routed through the data org or the product org. And the people who are responsible for particular business value get the feedback almost immediately. We've talked about this before. As an org, the org needs to focus. One of the aims of meditation is to make it easier for you to focus, or to make your focus more powerful. Pretty much every job I've worked at, I've militated to do fewer things, but do them better. And again, this might be a cultural thing, but there's a lot of fake work that the CEO says is important, or some other highly paid person in the room thinks is important, or some competitor did something and now suddenly you have to do the same thing, even though it may or may not be relevant to you. These are all examples of fake work, and what you need to do is you need to allow only that which is truly important to capture your attention. This is how an organization meditates. It takes courage, just like it takes courage to sit for 20 minutes in one place and do nothing when there are 10,000 things that are screaming for your attention. And lastly, meditation allows you to step outside the flow of thoughts and flow of work. Meditation is a way to check in with your entire body from time to time. It's not thinking where you're only checking in with the intellect. In meditation, you feel and focus on every sensation that you're feeling throughout the body. And I see a lot of engineering leaders, they don't check in with everyone. They only check in with their direct reports. This is kind of the organizational equivalent of thinking and not meditation. I feel up to even 200, 250 people, it is still possible for you to meet, maybe not one-on-one, of course, but in groups, to meet with everybody in the org and do a check or check-in with the entire organization. This is quite critical to do. At larger scales, of course, we have different problems, but many of us, I've seen many examples of engineering leaders who abdicate this responsibility of checking in with the entire organization from time to time. And these are kind of the ways in which you can do it. You can do one-on-ones, you can do all-hand meetings, you can do cadence meetings with particular groups, and so on. And you need to observe the whole work and not just part of it. And the other thing about meditation is it allows for bottom-up. It allows for your gut to speak to your mind. It allows for your intuition to talk to you. And within an organization, there are people who have knowledge that is not perhaps percolating to the top. And you need to design systems where this knowledge, kind of embodied as an organizational intuition, is also made available to the conscious mind, or what you call the leadership of an organization, which can consciously direct action. In short, you need to be connected with the whole body of the organization. Pranayam is another aspect of the yogic path. It is, pran is breath, and ayam is control. So this is breath control, but what is the organizational equivalent of breath? I would say information, just like a human body takes in breath and does work with it. Organizations, especially software companies, inhale data, transform it into information, and exhale value back in return. And it is entirely possible to consume information wrong, just like it is possible to breathe wrong. In fact, you might be surprised that 90% of people on the planet breathe wrong. And you might say that's ludicrous, but in essence, most of us are breathing from the chest and not from the belly, and when you breathe from the belly, you get a much bigger dose of oxygen and just much more energy, right? And so control over how, and with information is the same. You might be breathing information wrong, right? And if you figure out how to inhale information correctly, you can lead to an enriched experience for all aspects of the organization. And there are essentially two forms of information pollution. One is your communication architecture. If you're on Slack all day long, you're probably not doing communication architectures correct. This is a topic for a whole other talk about how to set up communication architectures in your company. And the other thing is, be mindful of your dashboards. I've seen product company after product company where the amplitude is just a mess. No one can actually find the correct chart for anything. No two people have the same conception of what a particular metric is, and loads of exceptions which half the team knows and half the team doesn't. So when the new person creates a chart, it is wrong, and so on and so forth. Just a mess. So we need to be mindful of what we breathe and how we breathe as an organization. And we need to consume data consciously at a rate and depth that energizes the whole organization and doesn't pollute it, in a sense. Niyam is the right action according to the Eightfold Path. And what it means is you're not basically reacting to triggers. You're responding consciously to an event, right? And every unconscious reaction, all of us have our triggers, and if we didn't know it, the moment we end up in a close relationship, we realize that we have all these triggers that our spouse or whoever is pressing, right? Because just when you spend so much time with people, you end up exposing a lot of these triggers to them. And and we know, like, when we get triggered, like what we do, the reaction is immediate, it is spontaneous, it is reflexive, and it is entirely unconscious, right? In an org, this manifests as process, right? The org suffers trauma, and in order to salve the trauma, it creates a process. And then it suffers another trauma, say a deploy went bad, or a bug was released, or whatever, and it keeps adding to this checklist of process, right? But process is an unconscious reaction. If everyone were fully conscious while doing the deploy, you would not need a process. They would understand precisely what is meant to be done at that particular point in time. But the process that we do for deploys and, I don't know, RCAs and so on, these are all manifestations of organizational trauma. And while we'll never get to an organization with zero process, it is necessary to revisit your processes from time to time and drop those that don't serve the organization. And it's the same with ritual. Ritual is an important part of spirituality, and it is an important part of the way organizations do their work as well. But there is a grave misunderstanding of what ritual is. Ritual is not about performing the actions. The rituals are there to guide your attention to where it needs to be. The stand-up is a ritual that all product engineering organizations engage in, but it is not there to ask people what are you doing and what are you blocked on. It is there so that you can pay attention to what is required to be paid attention to. And when a ritual, like I've seen stand-ups where there are 12 people and only the person talking is actually interested in what's going on. This ritual at this point is just going through the motions. It is a dead ritual. A ritual is only useful if it is engaged in consciously. And agile scripture is a finger pointing at the moon. If you have a dog and you point to the moon, the dog will look at your finger, not to the moon. And agile scripture, which is all of this knowledge that we have about how to run agile orgs, is a finger pointing at the moon. It is not really important to sit and argue the nuances of what velocity means and what this means. In fact, we have to look at what that finger is pointing to. And all agile is really saying is be conscious and take the next step that you see in front of you. So it's important to revisit your rituals from time to time and drop those that don't serve you. And this is what leads to correct action, in my opinion. And in the end, it is not so difficult. It is actually quite simple. All you have to do is be conscious and bring your heart to work. Because there is no ecstasy, there is no joy, there is nothing if you cannot bring your whole self to work. And if you bring your heart to work, you care about the people that work with you, you care about the outcomes that you're trying to deliver, then all of these things that I have shown will just become self-evident and apparent. And maybe you find a way different from the one that I did. And with that, I will say the next word with a lot of consciousness. This word is said billions of times every day in India, but what it means is, I salute the divinity inside you, right? And so even this simple word, when you say it consciously, it becomes almost a prayer of sort. So thank you, and namaste.